So welcome back, everybody. My name is Paul, and in case you haven't seen my channel before, I talk a lot about ancient mysteries and perception and meditation and all kinds of interesting subjects. And lately I've been talking a lot about politics and so on and the different kinds of things that are going on. And I want to talk today a lot about perception because ultimately perception, our human perception, is just all we have. Okay, we have this little point of our attention and we can see things and perceive things. And it's very, very critical for us to have clear perception in our life because just like an animal, if they don't know what food to get, or if they can't hear well, they can't catch a mouse or something, they're going to die. You see, so our perception is a little different than an animal's perception, but we have an intellectual perception, and we have to understand what's going on in our culture, in our society, and all that, and then we can guide ourselves without having to depend on other kinds of people or situation. Okay, we need to have our own perception. Now, I talk about perception a lot in the mystical sense in many of my other videos, and the main point I try to make is that this human perception that we have it has a tremendous more potential than we are told about. But the only way that we're going to know that for ourselves is to have our own experience, you see. And there are techniques that people have practiced for thousands of years that enable one to just settle into their own being, because growing our perception, expanding our perception, and getting more accurate perception does not depend on acquiring something. You see, it's a hard thing to understand, but we already have everything, and when we center ourselves and feel a sense of non-duality within our own being, a sense of completion, a sense of oneness within ourselves, then our whole being becomes a perceiving organ. You see, one thing that I stress is that even though we have physical senses, we have different kinds of perceptions. Those particular senses that we commonly refer to as the five senses. But if you notice that the taste and smell are connected in a lot of ways, and there are people who've had, there's a particular ability, you might say, it's a unique thing that happens to some people where they can actually see a color and hear a sound, or they can see a color and smell, or they can hear a sound and they can, feel a color or something. You see, so ultimately, in the mystical sense, our perception, we are one big organ. Just like I have, we have 5 fingers, and on that 5 fingers is connected to some other things, and that goes to our brain. And then our brain, our whole brain is integrated with this whole energy field around us, you see. Just like a cat has whiskers, all living human beings have a little bit of a radiance, you might say, of a whole bunch of energies. That we have a heat energy coming out of ourselves, we have electrical potential, we have various things that I discuss in other videos, but we have basically a perceiving system. Our whole awareness is one perceiving system, and the more we get to the source of that perception, the greater and more accurate a perception is going to be about anything, including politics. Okay, so I want to encourage people to sit for a minute and just feel their own being, because when we have our eyes closed, even though we're not seeing, we're still perceiving. You see, even when we're not even thinking, there's still a perception going on. This is something that's hard to understand for some people. They say, well, I think, therefore I am. Well, I disagree with that. I say, well, because you're able to think, and you can turn that on and off, but you don't have your existence just because you have a thought. You see, a thought is a choice, you might say. So I can rest in my own non-dual being and feel the aggregate of my perception. You see, this is the kind of a thing I'm trying to help people understand, that to perceive this life and navigate through this life in a normal way, we need our own perception. We don't need, we have to be independent. I mean, we can get other information from around ourselves. We can get a source. We can perceive with our eyes, but that's only part of our perception. We can perceive with our ears, but that's only part of our perception. When we quiet ourselves, we just stop. It's just a simple stop. You see, this is the interesting thing. Like a lot of people, it's very common for human beings. We just think we can do. We got the next thing we got to do. We're planning it and thinking. But then it's just like a car. You see, even an airplane. When you fly a little airplane, you might be going pretty fast, but when at some point you just stop. I mean, even the biggest airplanes, they just stop. Even big ships, they stop. You see, human beings need to stop sometimes. You see, our perception needs to be like non-reactive, like a mirror. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about it, and I'm going to get some notes here, but. To perceive anything, even to understand me or anything you see on TV or whatever, we need to be in a receptive place. Now, in the same way that we have a manufactured identity, just like we might get up in the morning, we put on a certain set of clothes, we go to work and we do a certain activity, and we play a particular role. And some people even have like a costume or a particular thing that they have to wear, you see. Or else they have to put on a certain personality or whatever. Maybe the guy who's a boxer, he goes out there and he makes a big deal and he pretends and he goes out and he fights and then he goes home to his wife and he says he's a totally different guy at home. You see, he plays with his kids and stuff, but when he goes boxing, he does something different, you see. So we have a certain manufactured identity that is accumulation of our thought patterns and say, well, we have an identity, the way we dress or, whatever. But our real identity is not anywhere a function of the clothing that we wear or the ideas we possess. Because when we let go of that type of identity, we realize who our true self is. Just like a person who might have a performance when they do a job or whatever, they might, excuse me, they might actually do a performance, an act. But they go home and they don't continue the act, you see. We have to be authentic to our own being, and we often aren't told that. You see, this is the problem. See, when a child is young, they have a lot of instinct and they can learn really quickly, you see. Then we get older, and then our families program. I mean, let's face it, okay? In various ways, societies or whatever, cultures, businesses, they program people like, okay, here's how you do this and this and this, and I expect this and this and this. Okay, they give us, sometimes they even impose us on an identity and the kind of clothes we have to wear and the religion or whatever. So, but in our true deep self, that we're none of that. You see, we don't have that identity. Now, the way to have a clear perception is to be non-reactive to what we perceive, because we may have a concept. Let's say, for example, I've been to India, and a lot of people have been to India, but India's a big place, and I can say, well, I know this certain place in India, and it looks like this and that, and it has like, all these features and this and that, terrain and plants or whatever, but it doesn't make any difference to you because you're not there, you see, and no matter how good a reference I am, or, maybe I show you some pictures, okay, but that even only gives you a little bit version of it, you see. So, to understand something that a reality, we need to have our own experience, not what someone told us. So that way, the starting point for learning how to perceive accurately is to drop a lot of preconceptions, you see. Just put them every single thing, because, look, we were like that when we were born, you see. We are like that, open, totally, concept-free, and then the layers start coming, you see. Now, I'm talking about this in reference to politics, too, because the way we perceive makes a difference in who we choose. And, like, for example, we listen to a politician talk. Okay, and they just yak, and we hear it, we say, okay, it sounds good, you see. It just sounds good. Maybe they even look good, you see. Sounds good, look good. We limit our perception, but we don't really know about the personality. We don't know what they do. We don't know their skills. We don't know anything. We don't know their associations, their financial interests, or nothing. Sounds good, looks good. And then someone comes along and says, yes, not only does it sound good and look good, but it is good. And it is good because we told you it's good. You see, when the media says we know this thing is right, or we know this is the right thing to do to have this war, or we know this, they're telling us a story. See, ultimately we have to say, okay, I hear what you say. I hear this, but I'm not. That's not the end of my perception. You see, I got to check it out. Now, how do you check it out? Okay, the problem is that we are not told that we have the ability to have a lot more perception. And this gets into a little bit of metaphysical stuff, because the reality is, I mean, this is what sages have said and experienced, and lots of people have experienced it, but, you know, in meditation, you realize the truth of the fact that consciousness, there's a saying, consciousness is one, but the forms are many. So everything in existence comes from consciousness. Just like the ocean has, you know, every bacteria, every sea fish, every kind of being, any kind of creature that's in the ocean, it comes from the ocean, it gets nutrition from the ocean, and it goes back in the ocean. You see, it's just, you know, our bodies are like that, okay? But the consciousness, the ocean represents the consciousness, okay? The ocean of consciousness, you might say. Within that consciousness, there's a massive amounts of life. It's just incomprehensible amount of life in the ocean. We can't even conceive of it. Even one part of the ocean we can't conceive of. So this consciousness that exists in this life, you know, we know that there's vast amounts of ocean that we don't know about, right? It's obvious. The same way with consciousness. There's vast amounts of consciousness that human beings and beings can explore, that sages have talked about for thousands and thousands of years, and modern sages, you know, this like, hey, everybody, you know, this vehicle, you know, it has all kinds of abilities, and the abilities to perceive in a greater way start with our centering ourselves and going to a place of non-duality where there's no reaction to what you perceive, so that you can perceive the facts, not what we're told. You see, now, you know, people in modern society, we argue about the truth of certain things, whether it's capitalism or socialism or whatever. There's all different kinds of polarities that people argue about, what's good or what's bad. You see, but all the people on one side, they're arguing, and then in their true nature, all they are is this divine, beautiful consciousness, and they're just like this breathing, this life is breathing. You might say the earth is a whole being, okay? The prana of the earth, the atmosphere of the earth, the being, the heat of the earth, the electrical energy of the earth, is one complete massive being, and within that being, just like all these little fish in the ocean, the vast, vast ocean, the planet itself is a mega being. It's hard, you know, as above, so below. You see, we are a microcosm. You see, the ocean's in us, and we are in the ocean. It's sort of like a hard concept to understand. But let's say the air inside a bottle is exactly the same as the air outside the bottle, but there's a cap on it, and that's our ego. It's like our concept of ourself is our own self-limiting understanding and self-perception. We say, okay, well, I'm this living thing, but I'm limited. See, but we take the cap off, the cap of our limited understanding, and we realize that we are immersed in and part of a great consciousness, and there's only one consciousness. That's the thing. It's hard for people to understand that. It's an age-old statement, and it's a profound statement, but, you know, they like, well, if you ask someone, like, you know, is there a God? Well, there's nothing but God. I mean, there's whatever you call God, there's nothing but infinity. I mean, we're not these little particles that we just separate ourselves out of, like, okay, I got this clothing on, and I'm Joe or whatever, and I got this identity, and I'm debating whether there's God or not. Well, we're talking about? You're just like a little amoeba. You're just like a tiny little speck on the earth. You just completely like a drop of nothing as a being, you know, in that little identity that we have, you see. But we sit around and debate and have conversations about whether God exists. But is our brain, if God did exist, if God exists, is our brain able to measure it? Are we able to just say, yes, I've decided, yes, God does exist? You see, it's kind of silly to have those kind of conversations. How do we experience whatever God is, whatever the infinity is? We just have to be resting in our own beingness, not our ego, not the costume that we wear to work or our profession, but a place where there really is no duality at a certain place within our own awareness, and that place is complete peace. Now, when it applies to politics and making decisions, it helps us understand the complexity of the situation because, like I said, our perception, we have to trust some kind of inner deep sense of it because it doesn't mean if the ads can sound good. You see, if someone so says this, they say it very loudly and they just keep saying it over and over again, and then you just like get so confused. They go to a place within, and there's certain universal values that have to do with living beingness, being, that reference point of beingness within our own self is alive with potential. It doesn't harm. It's not unkind. It doesn't destroy. You see? So if you see some kind of activity going on and there's destruction, and there's certain human behavior can go very much along with the universal feeling of peace and harmony. That's our nature. It's our nature. I see animals. They don't fight unless they really, really have to. They don't want to have injuries. I have like a cat and like it lives on the back, and sometimes animals come to steal her food, and like, okay, well, I'll hiss at the little ones and get them to go away, but the big ones, okay, I'll just mind my own business, okay? Let them eat. But human beings, we get attached to our sense of identity, that costume that we wear, whether it's a political costume, if I'm a liberal or I'm a whatever. Put a label. It's just so sad that human beings put labels of any kind on ourselves or each other. Why are we doing that? Why are we saying I'm a liberal? Whatever a liberal is. What's a liberal? Is that it? That's all you are? No. You're a lot more. There's a whole lot more to your beingness. And again, common sense comes from that deep source, you see. The integration, you see, one reason that they always say the old country folk have good common sense, because why? Because they have to deal with it. They have to deal with reality, okay? They get up and have to deal with the cows and stuff like that. They don't have a chance to like decide whether they want to sleep in or whatever. They got to harvest their crops on time. They got to feed their animals. They got to do stuff, okay? You see, people who lived like that for thousand years. They didn't have a choice of like, well, let's see, today I'm going to go to the game today or whatever. They didn't have that kind of activity. They just said like, okay, it's raining or it's sunny. I got to go fishing today or whatever. You see, so common sense comes from integration in our life, our daily life, in the values of being alive and preserving life and not having destruction and being kind and all those healthy things. A farmer is good to his cattle because he wants the cattle to produce and everything, and he's not going to harm them, and he's just going to like try to make sure his crops are okay, and he wants to make sure everything's good. A lot of times in modern society, just like everything's good, everything's automatic, going to order my food, I don't have to cook it, I don't have to do anything, I don't even know where it comes from or whatever, it'll be here in 20 minutes. We have to have our own common sense, and that means getting back to our own inner sensibilities inside.